So once we're done with this, we're going to see another particular behavior of processing, which also is useful when you know about it, but when you don't know about it, it can be another source of confusion. And that's the selection. You can select things actually in your data, in your vector data. You can do a selection. There are several different ways to do selection, and that's important to know how processing uses the selection. To select things, I know that, I guess that you're familiar with that, at least with the most basic one, right? You get several ways of selecting things. You go to the menu, view, select, and you have a list of different ways of selecting things, right? These are the ways of selecting things that are more graphical or interactive. But if we want to do a complex selection, like selecting all the points that are 10 points from this other point and the value is whatever and they have been created by whatever, something like that, then we have to go to query languages, which is what I mentioned before. If you want to do something more complex, you're not going to be able to like point and click in a rectangle, click in a polygon. You need some more complex queries, right? So that's the reason why I was recommending you to learn some query languages. But we're going to do a very simple selection in this case, like select features by rectangle, which you just drag and drop, click and drag. And you just select all the elements that fall within the rectangle that you draw, right? So I'm going to do that. Select features by rectangle in here, right? And I just select that, right? Like that. Whoop. And you see they change, right? One important thing to notice in here, as I mentioned it, I made a rectangle and I then QGIS had to calculate all the points that are in the rectangle. That means all the points that the coordinate, it's higher than the lower x, but lower than the higher x, etc. And if you have a special index, that go much, much faster. So if you have a layer with million points, you drag and do like that, it might take a while. But if you have a special index, it's going to go much faster. So it's not just the processing that gets better. If you have your special index, everything goes faster, right? Even the selection. Okay. So now we have some points selected in there. It's 5 points in my case. You might have selected 1, 2, 10, I don't know how many, right? So how does processing takes into account the selection? Okay, basically, this is the rule. If there is no selection, it uses everything. That's what we've been doing. We had no selection, we did reproject, and it reprojected all the points, right? But if there is a selection, it is going to use only the selection. That's how processing works. If you are familiar with some other QGIS stuff, or if you have used ArcGIS or some other software, you're probably going to find something like this. Let me check one of them, like points and polygon. Not this one. Just going to show an example like complex file. Yeah. Sometimes you find this. Use only selected features. This is something that you find in some algorithms in QGIS, not in processing, outside processing, some algorithms, or in some other software. It is pretty typical. Like, shall I use only the selection? Well, processing is never going to ask you that, right? Because the thing is that if there's a selection, that means that you want to use the selection. If you don't, just remove the selection. That's it. That's how it works. That makes it much, much easier to develop algorithms, right? Because you actually, the programmer doesn't have to worry about. The programmer has to ask processing, like, give me all the features in this layer. And then if there's a selection, processing will give them just the features that are selected, right? So it's much easier for the programmer. The programmer doesn't have to worry about anything. He has to program the algorithm. Don't worry about selection or not. This case is much more difficult. You have to write it twice, like one in case of selection, one if there's not a selection, right? So you're never going to see that in processing. No, use selected, no. It always uses a selection. If there is no selection, it uses everything. So that's it. Let's try and see how that works. Let's try to reproject the layer having a selection. Okay, so just do it yourself. Reproject the 23030 layer, right? Reproject it into 23029, and you should see that the resulting layer only contains the selected features, right? Make sure that the layer you have selected is the one you're exporting, right? I have selected things on my reproject layer, so if I now export 23030, there's no selection on that. So make sure that the layer you're exporting is the one that has the selection, right? That's a simple idea, but sometimes it's, if you know it, it saves you some trouble, because I know some people that don't know that part. They start working, it's like, I don't get it, don't know what's going on. Like, it's only using 5 points. But that's because there's a selection, right? Or also, if you know it, it's useful for doing some things. We're going to see an exercise about interpolation that we have to split one layer in two, and you actually don't have to split it. You just make a selection and use one part, then you invert the selection. We're going to see it like that, right? So make sure you make a selection, then export, then reproject, and you will see that the reprojected layer actually just contains the points that you have, right? You can also select things from the table, in case you don't know. You open the attribute table, and then you just can select in here, right? You see, you can select the rows, and automatically the geometries get selected. So it's a different way of selecting things, right? We're now going to see how to use some external algorithms, like Saga and things like that. And when you call Saga, it's also going to use the selection, right? This works for every single algorithm in processing. But when you call Saga, Saga doesn't know about the selection, right? Because the selection is something that is inside QGIS, right? Then the layer, the file where all the data is in there, there's no selection in a shapefile. The selection is something from QGIS. So to be able to communicate that to Saga, what we do is export the layer. We export an intermediate layer with only the selection, right? So that means that if you have a selection, even if the selection just has half the point, it's probably going to be slower than having the whole file. That's important to know. Sometimes you may think like, it's going slower. Like, yeah, it's right in the file, actually. So we can pass that file to Saga. There's no other way that we can communicate to Saga and tell Saga about the selection. QGIS understands a lot of formats. Some applications don't understand all those formats. Like, shape files are pretty common everywhere, but you might have like a GeoJSON, for instance. Saga doesn't understand GeoJSON, right? But if you have a GeoJSON file in here, you can use it to call Saga. The thing is that processing is going to see your files like, this is a GeoJSON. I cannot pass it to Saga. So it's going to write a shapefile or a spatial database as an intermediate file. It might take some more time, but in the end, that allows to have like a seamless workflow that you can call all the application with all the file formats, right? And also, Saga doesn't generate GeoJSON, but if you run a Saga algorithm and say like, I want this to be output.geojson, what it's going to do is call Saga to create a different format that Saga supports, like a shapefile, and then QGIS will convert it, processing will convert it into GeoJSON. So you don't have to worry about that. It's transparent for the user, but internally it's going to do some more complex things, right? So just to let you know. Okay, about the selection, there are also algorithms in the processing toolbox that we can use for selection, actually. Yeah, and these are good for two reasons. One, it's because they can do other things that you cannot do actually on the normal selection stuff, but also because sometimes you might want to add selection as part of a model. We're going to see the model, it's a workflow, right? So you cannot stop the workflow to, select it manually. So you add it into an algorithm, right? And there are some selection algorithms. Easy way to find them is just type in selection, of course. Right? Yeah, okay. This random selection, select by attribute, select by location. I'm going to run the random selection one, just do a random selection within my set, right? So I can just take it and say like, okay, let me put that so you can see, right? I see something like that. I'm selecting based on the percentage of selected features. I'm 50, so I'm trying to select half of the features, right, in the layer, right? So from my
take how does it discern between a number or percent, percentage?
You just select a year, number selected or percentage. You select the method and then you add the number, and the number means different thing. Important things about here, there are a lot of things. This looks simple, but it's not that simple. There's things to comment in here. First thing is there's no output. You see, there's no output, right? So that means it's not generating anything. It's just selecting, right? So there are no output vector, no output rasters. There's no output, right? You see in there. Second thing, is that we are entering a number. That's a new thing, right? That's a new thing that we haven't done before, right? We just been selecting layers or selecting a field in the case of converting our table into a point layer, but never enter a number. It's easy. You just have a box, you type your number, but you have these two little arrows that, you know, it's a classical spinner that you can just go over there, up and down. It's not difficult. But the most interesting thing is that we have this button here, right? We have this button here, and that is like a small calculator that we can use to calculate things, right? And this is a calculator that we can take things from there. In this case, it's not that useful, right? But in other cases, you might want to use these values. You have, like, you know, the extents. Like sometimes you're going to have to enter extent or something like that. So you can use these values, like the full extent of the layers, the current extent. You know, some values like average values of some layer, some things like that, right? Okay, so, you know, you see, you know, the extents and things, and then you can enter in here any value. Like if you don't really, like 6 multiplied by 89, and that's it, right? So you enter your expression here using all those values and that, and it's a small calculator that you can use to, if you are going to enter a name. This is especially useful in the case of the extent. Like if you, for instance, you have a raster layer, you say like, there's a field for entering the cell size. It's like, I want the cell size so the layer has 100 pixels. Well, you just take the minimum and the maximum and make the difference, divide it by 100, and that's the cell size that again, right? So it's easier if you make a quick expression. So whenever you're entering some number, you have this small calculator in here that you can use, right? And in this case, it's just, you know, I enter number 50, and I'm saying 50% of the points in my reprojected today, right? That's it. Okay. So it should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Yeah? Cool. Okay. So there are other types of selection. I'm not going to go through any one. I said I'm not going to explain you all the algorithms. My idea is to show you the basic ideas. So I'm showing all these different parameters that we can have, numbers, layers, etc. And in the end, when you know that, you should be able to look for that, and that's what we are going to do actually tomorrow. Okay. So we're going to move ahead, move a little bit more. And actually we're going to use our first external algorithm. We've seen that already because I've called some Saga algorithms, but we're going to use algorithms that are not in QGIS. We've been using everything from the QGIS Manual, QGIS Q algorithms. Those are things that do not require additional software. Those are things that when you download your QGIS, they're already in your QGIS, right? Because they just need the QGIS application. But there are other algorithms that they use different things. You don't see it in there, but there are algorithms that use last tools. That means that you have to go to the last tool website and install last tools. You probably did that yesterday, right? In the case of Saga, you have to install Saga. There's a package in case you're using Windows. That's the OSGeo for Windows package that installs QGIS and Saga. That was installed on your computers. You already have Saga, but I'm going to tell you show you how to install Saga so it's correctly configured. Because one important thing is that you see your stuff in here, right? Saga or View, Grass, whatever. That doesn't mean that it's installed, right? That means that there's an icon in there, right? Then that algorithm is going to try to call Saga, but if you don't have it installed, it's not going to work. Yeah? I mean, I can add an icon in my system to open Internet Explorer, but if I don't have Internet Explorer installed, it's not going to work, right? So it's the same thing. The processing toolbox has all the entries. You can turn them on and off in the configuration, but that doesn't mean that the software is installed, okay? Processing will try to check that it's installed, right? If you try to run a Saga algorithm and it's not installed, it's going to tell you, hey, it's not installed. I'm trying to check, and it seems that it's not installed, or it's a wrong version, or whatever. But seeing it here, that doesn't mean it's installed. I think in your computer should be installed because someone over there, it was you, I think, you run a Saga algorithm? Yeah. I think, yeah. So that means that it's installed and configured. It's important. But anyway, I'm going to go through the configuration process so you can see it, right? So to configure this, things that we call external providers, we have to go to the processing options. Options and configuration, right? And then we have this provider section, and it's this oldest provider. You see that here there are things that are not shown here. Like you see, tools for LiDAR data. I don't have any tool for LiDAR data in here. That's because I have them turned off, they're not enabled, right? but I can activate that, right? You see, I activate that, and now I have all the last tools in there, right? I don't know if it's going to work because I don't know if it's configured. I don't know if it's correctly done, but you have it in there, right? So there's like, I have activated the provider, but it needs some dependency. We're not going to see that today. Hopefully we'll see that tomorrow along with Martin. But right now what we're going to do is focus on Saga. We go back, options and configuration, and we open the Saga provider, right? So all the things about Saga are in here, right? First I have the icon to activate that. That means, do you want me to show you the Saga algorithms in the toolbox? Maybe you don't want to show them, even if it's installed. But in this case we're going to have it installed, you know. Then there are two versions of Saga. There's 2.0.8 and the latest one is 2.1. And processing supports both of them. You can use both of them, but they're not the same. So you have to tell processing which one you're using, right? I don't know which one you're using, how it is configured. If it works, it should work. If not, we can just change that. I think you probably have 2.0.8. The officially supported one is 2.0.8, right? Supported by processing. The one that's supposed to be better, actually, is working better. 2.1 it's better, but it's a little bit more unstable in our experience. So if you have 2.1, you leave it live, you have 2.0.8, you have to click on that. Right? I'm using 2.1 and see this is my Saga folder. That's the place where my Saga executables are. If you install a different version of Saga, you have to change that, right? If you install QGIS, just QGIS, no Saga, and then you install Saga separately, then you have to manually configure that. In this computers, it's already configured, right? If you use Windows. I don't know if anyone here uses Linux. If you use Linux, then you have to configure it manually, and there is no Saga folder. If you use Linux, you have to add the Saga executable to path, and it will just find it. And in case you're using Mac, if you're using an OS X, then you must use Saga 2.1 because Saga 2.0.8 doesn't work in Mac. So in case you have questions about that, that's a very good thing that I actually recommend you, which is QGIS Manual. QGIS user guide, or you go to documentation, should work. QGIS user guide manual. There's the let me check. QGIS processing framework, right? This is the help for the processing framework, and there's this section in here called configuring external application, and it tells you everything. I definitely recommend you reading all that if you want to work with processing. Okay, that's a pretty comprehensive documentation with all the information about all the elements. We have just been working with a toolbox. We're going to see the other ones later, but there's quite a bit of documentation. So in case you want to work with that, reading the manual is always good, right? And in case you're having trouble with that, before going to the list and say, I cannot work with that, Saga is not working, then just go there and read, because it might be the case that you're not correctly configured, right? Okay, we can assume that in your case everything is correctly configured, right? So that's it. The only thing you have to know is that you have to activate that and use the Saga folder, which should be already configured in the system. There are quite a few other things, but we're not going to actually to pay much attention to all of them. We're going to leave them in there. One thing that we're going to do is we're going to click in this log execution commands. Just click on that. Make sure that one's clicked. Like that, right? What it's going to do is, like when QGIS, when processing is going to call Saga, it's going to pass a command to Saga. So it's going to write that down, so then we can have a look and see what it's doing, right? Actually doing. So it's going to give us more information about the communication between processing and Saga. So we can later see it, and I can explain a couple of things. Just clicking OK. I don't know if you're familiar with the R language. Probably you have done some statistics, you're familiar with R. There's a link between R and processing, so you can run R from here. I'm not going to get into that because it's more complex, but if you use R, it gives a very good interface for those of you that actually like R and use R. Okay. anyways, a split shapes layer randomly is going to split into, just take our vector layer and split it into. That's what it's going to do. It's very, very simple, but you know, just so we get how it works, and then we can have a look at some other things to understand a little bit more how this is working underneath. Yeah, it's not the same as with a normal algorithm that it's done in QGIS like the ones we had before. It's actually using another program, but you're not going to see about that, but it's good to understand how it works, right? Okay. So you see, this is a Saga algorithm. That means it's calling something that it's in a different software, whatever, but the interface, it's the same, right? The interface is always the same. No matter what I'm doing underneath, no matter what I'm calling, this interface actually it's created automatically. Its processing creates it automatically. There's always the same structure. Parameters, log, help, whatever you have in here, right? It's pretty simple in that sense, right? So I'm going to take my whatever, the 4336 or the other one, whatever the layer you actually want to use, and I'm going to split it into two layers. Similar to what I did with the selection, but instead of just selecting, I'm actually going to create two new layers, right? So it's group A and group B, right? I'm going to send them to two temporary files, so just two files, one with 50% of the points, one with another 50%. And now it's not processing that is going to do the process actually. It's a third-party application, right? Processing, what it's going to do is to take the layer, pass it to Saga. Saga is going to work and give something back, and then processing puts it back, right? So in this case, processing is just the interface, right? It's just the thing that allows you to do all this stuff together. But it's Saga actually who is doing the processing. So this is pretty simple. We just leave it like that. Group A, group B, 50%. We just run. And that's group A and group B. And then you see that the colors are almost the same. I know, in here it looks much better, actually. So you see, yeah, it just splits the layer randomly. Okay, one place or the other. Actually, I have two layers. They should have the same CRS as the input layer that I've used. In this case, it's the 4326. I can check it actually. That's it, 4326. So that means that Saga follows the same approach as processing. Just whatever you give me in, that's what I'm going to give you out in terms of CRS, right? So now this looks like a normal algorithm, and it's normal. It is a normal algorithm, but inside there's been some communication between Saga and processing, and there are two ways we can see that. One way, which is kind of useful, is that I can remove this layer. Let me calculate that again. But in the options and configuration, there's this option in general called keep dialog open after running an algorithm. So I'm going to run the algorithm, but it is not going to close the dialog where I enter the parameter. So I'm going to be able to check the log actually. Kick in here, right? So then I do the same thing, right? I'm gonna take away the selection just in case. View, select. So I go in here to the split layers. Same thing here. You see it runs, right? Well, in this case, it didn't show up a lot of stuff. That's because I think, but you know, this if you don't close that in here, it shows how things are going. I didn't have it click the option to keep all the information, right? So it's not showing everything. But usually, if you call an external application, you're going to have all the conversation between the application and processing here. But whenever you do things, apart from this log that it's not closed, so it changes to the log. You can see it. It's fine. Apart from that, we have the processing log, and this is a very useful thing actually. I have my two layers that are generated in here, right? So it's in the history and log, right? It's in there. Okay, processing, history and log, right? And if you open it, you have the history of all the things that you've been doing with processing, right? And there are 4 groups. 2 groups, warning, error, something wrong happens, right? In this case, everything went fine, so there are no errors. But if you go to the info one, okay, you see, if I actually see, this is the conversation between Saga and processing. This is what the execution commands. So you click on here, you select your layers graphically, and then processing turns that into this command. Shapes tool, blah, 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 all that. And it talks to Saga doing that, right? So this is why I told you, like, keep the execution commands, because now it's right in here. And here you can see what's going wrong, actually. This is another thing that maybe you don't understand that, but if you're having a problem and you want to talk to me, talk to someone that knows what's going on, it's like, send me that, send me the log, right? Send me the information here. Like, okay, and you go, oh, there's something wrong in the way it's called in Saga, whatever, right? And if you go to algorithm, that's the most interesting group of them all. Right? You see, this is a list of all the algorithms that we've been running. This is interesting for many reasons. One, because this is actually a Python call. That means that if you want to do your small script later, you can use this and copy this line, put it in the Python console, and that calls the algorithm, right? That's like, instead of clicking, you can use this line to execute the command, right? This same line. That's a Python command. Okay. You can click in here, in there. So if I copy and paste that, this is going to launch the algorithm, right? Another reason is that I can see, you know, what I've been doing, which is useful. If I'm in a workshop like that, I can see if you have been doing things correctly. I can just check the parameters that you pass and all the stuff, you know. It's like the algorithm, the input data, etc. And another useful thing is because I can rerun stuff from there. So let's say I just get rid of this. So what was the last algorithm that I ran? It was like split shapes layer randomly, right? So that's the last thing. So I just can double click on that, and you see it has created layers, right? So you can double click on this and it reruns the command that you ran before, right? Okay, so imagine that now you have created several layers as temporal layers, your QGIS crashes or your computer crashes, whatever. It's like, oh, I want to redo the last 5 steps. You just can double click, 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 and do it again, right? So you don't have to go in here and do whatever. This is never again. You don't have to come in here. You can have to. I click in that. I don't know why it didn't work. So you see, you can rerun your stuff by going to the log. I get confused with this magnifier thing. So you can just go to the algorithm and see what you've been doing. See, these are all the algorithms that I did. Starting from today, we started at 11 o'clock, and made our way. Yeah, we've been running quite a few algorithms already. Okay. Reprojecting layers, adding coordinates to points. And as I said, this is the Python call. So if you want to learn some Python, how to do the scripting of processing from Python, assuming that you know a little bit of Python, you can use this to learn the syntax of how to call algorithms, right? Any question? Fine. Yeah, you're pretty quiet after the break, huh?
Where's the Python command line?
Where is the Python command line? Plugins, Python console. And you just do import processing in here, and then you just have all the processing stuff. Just processing dot whatever, and you get a lot of useful things, right? So for instance, just to get an idea, if you want to get a reference to one of these layers, you can actually do it from here, just calling some processing. Sorry. So my vector layer is processing get object, and then you just pass the name 4326, right? Sorry, I'm missing the B. Get object. So you get a V, and you see V is a vector layer, right? So I just get let me show it to you more in detail in there. So you can see it just like give me the object call 4326, and it gives me a vector layer. You know, it's pretty easy to use to do stuff with processing. There are a lot of, you know, processing is a big library. It has a lot of methods, and those methods are exposed for other people to do other things. So actually the things that are pretty more complex in QGIS are much easier if you do them through processing. Actually, just get in a layer with a given name, just call that get object method. And there are several of them. We'll do some programming actually. You know, there's this thing here called scripts. That's where you can add your own algorithms. By using that with a very little bit of code, you can create new algorithms and implement your own stuff, right?